And we are recording on Thursday, August 10th, 2023 at 2:02 p.m. Eastern Time with Dr. Robert Malone and Dr. Stephen Hatfill coming on here yet again. And for everyone who I'm sure is tuning into this to watch, these two are my deep state handlers. As I showed you guys with that video, the jig is up. People have found out. I'll never understand how they can hold two thoughts in their mind that are so polarizing. That on one hand, I'm a deep state operative, and on the other hand, I've been banned from iTunes, Reddit, YouTube, and I'm broadcasting a show from a bedroom. So if I was in with the government, I would be making
Well,
that Joe
the,
Rogan
the
money.
obvious explanation is the government never pays very well.
Yes, well, that's what it is. And yeah, Dr. Hatfield, your thoughts on that? I figure you get.
You've been awarded a lowest cost technically acceptable contract.
I've been what is it, sheep dipped, where they take someone and put him into a civilian. I'm sure. I mean, I've showed you those videos where it's people's. I was telling my dad about it this past weekend, and of course, in the eloquent way that only my dad can say, just fuck them, keep working. I was like, thanks, Dad. But Dr. Hatfield, you're the only one here with the tie. So what are your thoughts on all of this?
Well, I couldn't listen to the woman anymore. There's no lack of even basic education in the biological sciences. It's just conspiracy theories.
Just to say, Stephen is talking about a clip that we're not going to discuss that comes from
Yeah.
Stephen is talking about a clip that, sorry, I thought you were done, that we're not going to discuss because it involves a hater that has gone over the deep end. So we're just going to let her be.
We'll just slide on that. Well, why don't we jump to a much more interesting topic of Dr. Peter Hotez, because I know you just posted about him, Dr. Malone.
Oh, I haven't posted about Hotez for quite a while. The latest is Offit. Even Brett Weinstein is jumping on the bus now about Paul Offit's comment to the point that he is clearly, so Paul Offit, for the introduction to the audience and framing this, is like Hotez, a kind of anointed vaccine guru here in the United States, who had a key role in the redevelopment of a rotavirus vaccine after the initial rotavirus vaccine failed. Has he actually ever invented anything novel? I'm not sure, but he does hold an endowed share in pediatrics and vaccinology at CHOP, I believe it is, UPenn. And he absolutely acts as a spokesperson and seems to be increasingly a spokesperson for the vaccine industry and the vaccine academic establishment, since we have lost the benefit of Mr. Hotez's framing, since he was resoundingly embarrassed post Joe Rogan and Bobby Kennedy.
Yeah.
And people wonder where he's disappeared to. He went immediately off to Israel, by the way, at the behest of the Israeli government. So just so we all know where he went. Offit, in a recent clip, acknowledged explicitly that there's a causal relationship between myocarditis, pericarditis, and the mRNA vaccines. And in this, he fell back on a old explanation that is now being recirculated that really doesn't fit the data, which is that to the extent that myocarditis and pericarditis occur, it has to do with mimicry, molecular mimicry between the virus and certain proteins of the heart, and it is an evoked autoimmune disease. The problem with that thesis, and Paul should know better, but it's interesting that Paul floated this, and now it's coming back in the press as the dominant explanation for what's now conceded to be a causal relationship, which the FDA and the CDC have known was a relationship since late 2011, at least. I mean, 2021 at least. And the problem with Offit's thesis that this is autoimmune, it still could be partially autoimmune, but the cardiac troponin levels come up very rapidly after administration of these products in actually abnormally high levels. That doesn't mean that everybody gets, all these people got clinical myocarditis. That's another thing, or pericarditis. But these levels come up fairly rapidly, and they are observed in up to 50% of people receiving the product. So some degree of myocardial cell damage. The other paper that's come out recently that's relevant to this speaks to the pediatric consequences of the myocarditis. You'll recall that we were all told early on that this would just be short-lived, transitory, and these damages would rapidly resolve in these young men, largely men. And that was an odd statement because classically viral myocarditis has unfortunately a fairly high mortality rate, and it causes scarring and long-term damage to the heart. And it would be odd that they would know that this was going to resolve itself quickly and not have that same clinical course when they'd only recently discovered that it was occurring. And so that was clearly yet more disinformation, or we could just call it a lie, propagated by the public health infrastructure and circulated and amplified by corporate media. And now we have a paper coming out that, in fact, these unfortunate young men that have developed clinical myocarditis have an alarmingly high rate of chronic scarring in their heart, just like what the history of myocarditis would predict, viral myocarditis in particular. So getting back to Mr. Offit, unfortunately, his thesis, which he floats as the explanation, just doesn't fit the data. And then we're left with, well, is this just yet another limited hangout that is being floated? Or is Mr. Offit just completely ignorant of the actual data here as it relates to this effect because he's in some sort of a reality bubble, which I think is even more scary as a hypothesis, because Mr. Offit sits on many of the key decision-making bodies at the FDA and the CDC. So if he's ignorant about these things or in denial or whatever the psychological mechanism is, then that speaks to what may be going on in these other committees. If he's one of the key thought leaders there. Over.
Dr. Hatfill?
Yeah, there's we've known for some time now there appears to be damage to the little powerhouses inside the cell, the mitochondria. For over a year now, it's been known if you take the vaccine and you inject it intravenously into mice, they develop a severe myocarditis, to the point on autopsy, you don't even have to be medically trained. You can pick out which one was the control and which mice were were injected. It's gross.
Yeah,
grossly
the
evident.
damaged heart gets dark.
Yeah. And again, in 2020, there was early evidence of this. And mRNA fragments had been recovered from these hearts from the vaccine, but it wasn't consistent. And there seemed to be an inability to culture live virus out of this autopsy material. But it was certainly a worry. And then they started seeing the dye retention studies that Dr. Malone's been talking about. When you have a lot of scar tissue in the wall of the heart and you inject a contrast dye for enhanced imaging, this dye was finding it very difficult to get out through the muscle tissue because of the fibrosis, because of the scar tissue. And not all of these patients had symptoms.
Yeah.
So the true incidence of this, I think it's going to be pretty high. I've heard figures passed around of like 1 in 35.
Yes.
Now, the long-term result of this. Myocarditis typically has like a severe myocarditis has about a 5-year survival rate. Because as you age, I mean, you need every little bit of cardiac reserve. And we had seen very early on that patients would survive even a mild COVID, and then they would go into heart failure. And then they would start showing, as Dr. Malone said, troponin 1 elevation, all the signs of cardiac muscle damage. And these were patients that had never, ever once received a tablet of hydroxychloroquine. And what the FDA did was immediately, before the vaccines had come out, had blamed this on hydroxychloroquine, not the virus. And there's about 20 different viruses, including some of the hepatitis viruses, that can cause a myocarditis. It's not a rare phenomena in medicine. And common things occur commonly. So rather than look at hydroxychloroquine, a safe drug for the FDA withdrew its EUA, but they never made one notion. What if you had lupus or rheumatoid arthritis and you were on hydroxychloroquine and you caught COVID? There was never any warning that you should come off your hydroxychloroquine temporarily. Not one. What we were seeing was the myocarditis in late patients. It wasn't due to the drug. And it's not been seen in over 300 studies now. People have been, Holter monitor is a little device you wear 24 hours a day, and it constantly records your heartbeat. And statistically significant numbers of patients have worn this and been caught COVID-19 and been given hydroxychloroquine. And there's no change in their ECG if they're given it in the first 5 days after symptom onset. There's no change in the baseline before and after 5 days of treatment. It's not a factor.
Dr. Malone, when you were, could you repeat what you said a couple minutes ago about they claimed early on that these were temporary side effects? Because I'm just thinking, how could you know that? It's 78 years ago yesterday we dropped a plutonium bomb on Nagasaki. 62 years ago today we started dropping Agent Orange in Vietnam. Maybe my favorite nuclear bomb test ever, because like a normal 33-year-old I do have favorites, is Buster Jangle, and it was a psychological test to see if U.S. soldiers would walk towards a tactical nuke, but it was also to see what radiation would do. And when you go back and you look at these things of guys spraying Agent Orange or walking towards a radioactive cloud, you kind of get this cringy feeling like you're administering death to yourself. Some people knew that, but most people didn't. They were guinea pigs. How can they know that this myocarditis or pericarditis is temporary or not severe? I mean, is the answer obvious that they don't?
Yeah. Well, the answer is obvious. It's intrinsic in the question because there hadn't been enough elapsed time.
Yeah.
So this we've seen this play out all through the COVID crisis, where various federal figures, often Mr. Fauci, because of his willingness to speak his bias and opinions on national broadcasts, would come out with statements that were clearly false, and often he would make statements about things that were not knowable, and the statements about the myocarditis resolving rapidly in an atypical way compared to viral myocarditis, traditional viral myocarditis, whether the myocarditis associated with the virus itself, which is what Stephen was mostly focused on a moment ago, or the myocarditis and pericarditis that Paul Offit was referring to, which is relating to the vaccine, there would be no way to know what the long-term consequences of those were at the time when those announcements were made, because there had been no time. The time had not elapsed. So the the easy, responsible thing to have said would have been, yes, we are observing myocarditis and pericarditis. There are signs that it is causally linked to the administration of the vaccine, and in some cases also to the uptake of, the infection by the virus. Now, as soon as anybody would say that, that would trigger the obvious hypothesis that what do those two things have in common? And the things they have in common is the engineered spike protein. But putting that aside, there's just no way that they would have known that, or could have known that these cases would take a different clinical course than that which is typically associated with viral myocarditis. And the logical conclusion would be that they would have the same course. And the only, trying to be as kind and generous to the government as possible, which of course I get criticized for, because that proves that I'm actually an agent of the government. But trying to give the benefit of the doubt, what we've heard again and again was a lot of these falsehoods were justified on the basis of seeking to avoid unnecessary or dysfunctional or counterproductive public concern. They're all built on the predicate thesis that the vaccines were safe and effective. This was the mantra. They are intrinsically safe and effective, and if administered to a sufficiently large fraction of the population, would achieve herd immunity, and therefore would end the risk of this, what was pitched to us and pitched to the government, unfortunately, this highly lethal pathogen that now in retrospect we can see the data, and it's not really a highly lethal pathogen in the way that was asserted to be. And so you had this house of cards built, highly lethal pathogen, safe and effective, if enough people took the virus, or the vaccine. Remember Tony saying 60% of population would get us to herd immunity, then it was 70, then it was 80. And then he acknowledged that, well, he didn't really know. He was just saying these things because the government wouldn't accept the truth. I mean, the people wouldn't accept the truth. In other words, there's a whole series of him, substituting his wishes and desires for facts and reporting them to us as if they were facts. So we had all the way through this, you could call it misleading information presented to us to avoid unnecessary or dysfunctional public concern. Or you could say we were lied to repeatedly. But this is another great example of that.
There's some dishonesty here also in the clinical trials. Several months ago, some very good clinical scientists, one of them from the BMJ, got a hold of the Pfizer clinical trials. This data had been made available through Judicial Watch, through a FOIA request, and they managed to get enough data that these guys could make their assessment. And their end assessment was, it was 300, I think, and 33% more dangerous to take the vaccine as a young adult than it was to catch COVID-19 and be admitted to hospital. There was no, in the clinical trials, there was negative benefit to risk ratio. Young people, and we've known this since March of 2020, generally COVID-19 is a self-limiting illness. And then as you go down in age into the youngsters and then the toddlers and the babies, they don't have the same expression of the viral receptors, the ACE2 receptor in their upper airways that adults do. And the risk to children it's not zero, but it's almost zero. It's infinitesimal. There was no reason to extend these injections, these immunizations, if you want to call them that, into these lower age groups. There was no justification whatsoever, and it was done anyway.
No justification.
This is not medicine.
Public health. Yeah, on the basis of
This
public
is not public health. This is not medicine. The children don't give it to each other. There's some very good studies on this. In fact, I just finished a chapter on a book about this and reviewed this. Children don't readily transmit it to other children, and they don't readily transmit it to adults. They're not manufacturing large quantities of virus to put enough out there in an aerosol form. I mean, even among family members, they're not transmitting it that much. And if it is, it's very low dose and it's self-limiting. So there was no reason for this. None at all. The same for pregnant women. We could see in the animal data that the nanoparticles, the lipid nanoparticles, didn't remain at the injection site. It spread throughout the body, both in the Pfizer and Moderna. The question would be, could this cross the placenta and enter the fetus? And I think it's Dr. Thorpe has just finished some very good studies with ultrasound indicating that, yes, the particles do cross the placenta. There was a complete lack of adequate monitoring. The V-Safe system could have been expanded early to include pregnant women with very specific questions concerning their pregnancy, but the CDC didn't bother to do that. And then in addition, a lot of this stuff starts about a week, 7 days away from vaccination. A lot of these serious adverse events. And the CDC was only reporting the first 7 days, which generally are like with any sort of immunization. It's your immune system being activated and you feel lousy, your arm is sore, this type of general malaise type of thing. And they were using this data to indicate that, oh, see, these vaccines are safe. Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx I'm sorry, but they didn't have a clue what they were doing. Absolutely not a clue. Dr. Birx now says, well, she never thought the mRNA vaccines would work. Well, I mean, that's just ridiculous. They were promoting these things like crazy. Dr. Walensky, I mean, it's been an unfortunate thing. It's been a tragic thing. And we need to take steps so that this can never happen again. And this will involve outside monitoring bodies that are outside of the federal health pharmaceutical complex. What's happened is, I mean, there really needs to be some legal accountability here. Those vaccines in the clinical trials never prevented infection. They certainly, there was no data. The trials weren't large enough, and the hospitalizations were so rare in the population that they were examining. They didn't look at the old people and the people with comorbidities and the places where you would see if the symptoms were alleviated somewhat with reduced admission to hospital and reduced severity of disease. They never had the numbers to even do this. They just made it up. And for such a highly experimental biological product, I mean, it's an outrage. It's an outrage against science, and it's an outrage against. I believe that not one person should have ever been given these vaccines. And there were definite signs around February of 2021 that the brakes should have been put on. Should we have tried the messenger RNA vaccines? Yes. We were in a national crisis, engineered or not, and we needed to explore all opportunities. In World War II, we tried 3 different ways to enrich uranium at the cost of millions and millions of dollars because we didn't know which one would work the best. Should a vaccine have been tried? Yes. But it needed to be well understood the highly experimental nature of these vaccines and the utmost care taken. And when the VSafe program was outlined, it was very carefully designed to be monitored. And then the CDC failed to report the data that was there past 7 days after receiving an immunization or a booster. The data was there. So the federal health agencies have failed. And it's time for a massive reorganization. We've ignored infectious disease now for way too long. For 40 years now, it's all been social sort of medicine. How many housewives burn themselves in the kitchen each year? How many homicides in this age group? Infectious diseases never went away, but they're certainly back with a furor now. We're getting at least one new infectious disease every year that was unknown to science. There's worse things out there. In the dark forests that we're cutting down, in the jungles that we're clearing, there's a lot worse things than COVID-19 lurking there. And this is probably our last warning until a major event happens with, this had about a 1% mortality rate. There's things out there with a 40% mortality rate. And if one of those gets loose, you start losing your large city infrastructures due to illness and deaths. And all of these, we have 120 of our largest cities, and their support systems with fuel and electricity and sanitation and all these things are so interlinked. If you lose any one of those arms, the whole thing collapses like dominoes. You lose 20% of your workforce over a period of a few months, and you're going to lose everything that supports that city. We don't know how bread gets to the supermarket. You can't model it. Or how gasoline gets out of the ground as oil and to the refinery. These are complex chaos mechanisms. It doesn't just magically appear there, but these distribution pipelines have evolved on their own. When you try to interfere with these, you end up like the old Soviet Union and your shelves are all bare. But they're all interlinked. No gas, no delivery trucks. No delivery trucks, no food on the shelves. So, I mean, we're reaching a critical thing here, I believe, which seems to have begun in 1995 when we started seeing all these unusual flu strains that we'd never seen before. And it's not abating. We really must start getting our act together now.
Devil's advocate, could you argue that these chaos systems would adapt in a way that we can't model? If we can't model, just going on that line, if we can't model how they work now, could you theoretically argue that we can't model how they'd adapt?
When you have so many systems so intertwined, they may adapt, but they're all going to go down at once or very close to each other. Number of things could cause this. A large solar flare and these high voltage transformers. There's a number of threats to our largest cities. But it doesn't take much for it to go chaotic. Disease, and if it's a pandemic, are other countries going to come in and help you? No, they're probably having their own difficulties. The speed that this went around the world, the different variants, was to me personally frightening. Sort of a recombinant thing coming out of India, and within a few months, it was over here. So these are things. Globalism has some bad things to it, because when somebody has trouble, everybody has trouble, and especially with pandemics. Air travel 24 hours, you can be on the other side of the world and in John F. Kennedy International Airport 24 hours later. These are all factors that weren't that much of a problem 100 years ago when things were all steamship. And the 1918 influenza still managed to spread around the world within a year and become, I think it's number 4 in the greatest plagues we've ever had. So these are threats that need to be addressed. And you can only do this with a rational thing and pre-planning. So there we're back. We don't have a pandemic defense now. It's like there's a lot of talk and this and that, but the actual things aren't being addressed at the local level. We're running out of time. Mother Nature isn't very happy with us. And I don't blame her. We've not looked after things very well. And I think we're going to see this in our lifetimes.
Dr. Malone, is there any way you can put a positive spin on this, or should I jump out of my 5th floor apartment right now? I don't know. I don't really know how to come back to that. I was gonna make a joke about.
So here's a positive spin.
All right.
One of the things we've learned is the power of the human immune system. Even in this case, to the extent that this is a pathogen of significance, what we've seen is, number one, how rapidly it's evolved to, towards the usual trajectory of more highly infectious and less pathogenic as it's moved into this new species, the human being, and also at how powerful and resilient our own bodies are in responding to this. And we've also learned the importance of this neglected factor that has many people have focused on, but the government neglected to, which was good health, things like vitamin D, things that enable us to be healthy and resilient, remembering that the threat of infectious disease has coexisted with the threat of human beings for the entire lifespan of the species. Infectious disease is not a new phenomena for the human species. It's not like we just arrived on this earth from, via UFOs. or UAPs in the last 3 years. We've co-evolved with most of these pathogens, and what has occurred over time is this elaborate evolutionary dance, or maybe if you wish to go there, there's a creation component to it, but their biology creates constraints. It's not completely an open field, and there are just a limited number of ways that pathogens can sneak by the defenses that have evolved in the modern human, Homo sapiens, where we have these layers of adaptive and innate immune response, which we're still learning about. It's fascinating how deep and complex this is. We're learning now that a lot of what we thought was innate immune response even has an adaptive component. So there are these layers of protection. There's only certain pathways that pathogens seem to be able to exploit. We are learning about ways to bolster those, let's say, weak links in the armor through a variety of biologics and drugs. And I'm of the camp, the non-Malthusian camp. There's the Malthusian logic that we live in a world of limited resources, and gradually human beings are at risk for outstripping those resources. And we have this inevitable endpoint that is quite nihilistic, that we will all return to the dust. And the counterpoint to that is humans, both biologically and cognitively, are amazingly innovative.
Yeah.
And so if you could take Dr. Hatfill's warnings as, oh my God, there's an inevitable dark future, or you could say he is alerting us to the need to innovate, plan, prepare. And that if we do that and we create structures that will allow the development and application of human innovation to address this issue in various forms, then there's a very good likelihood that together with our own innate biology is going to allow us to avoid this dark future that could occur. It's in the probability spectrum, and I think even Stephen will tell you that a lot of these things that he's speaking of have kind of probability clouds around them. So they're not necessarily inevitable. And what I'm hearing in his comments is the frustration of a gentleman who has spent his entire life basically saying in his own actions, not only warning, but acting to do something about it, and encountering bureaucratic incompetence and mismanagement and all the things that go along, the blowback, et cetera, that go along often with very large bureaucratic organizations in their attempts to address, or lack of attempts to address, threats. And I don't see the glass as quite so half empty. I think that we do have enormous capabilities. Obviously, I believed that even more at one point in my life because I contributed to the innovations for the baseline technology here, but also abandoned that technology in favor of other technologies as I learned that I could not overcome the inflammatory problems associated with it in my own laboratory research. So, here you get an example. And of course, I'm going to be criticized for this. I haven't spoken about it before. The other day, I got a email from my first postdoc. His name is Peter Berglund. Very proud of him. He came to me from the laboratory of Peter Lillystrom of the Karolinska, who happens to sit on the selection committee, but that's another tangent. And Peter wrote to me, he said, "Hey, I've just published in one of the cell journals my work demonstrating that these formulations are highly inflammatory and they're distributed all over the body. We did extensive research now, additional research beyond what was done for the Pfizer dossier, et cetera, prove that this is the case. And I think we've come up with, at least the data show that we've come up with new formulations that don't have these problems and do stay put where they're injected. Now we'll see about the test of time, and anybody who does this kind of stuff always hopes for the best. It's like birthing a child. But Peter's an example of he's now a middle-aged scientist, functioning at the peak of his capability, addressing head-on the problems that were identified with this tech that were identifiable before it was ever deployed in humans. Here we are 3 years later, he thinks he has a major advance in addressing those problems. And if we had been more responsible in deploying the tech, in characterizing it well, and prior to this global campaign that is, I think, destroyed its potential. I mean, who that right now, all the farmers are up in arms because they're worried that they're going to force this tech into their livestock, which is, to some extent an irrational fear, but it's an example of what happens when you jam this down people's throats. And so my opinion is that if we pay attention, act responsibly, act maturely, and have a bureaucracy that somehow we create boundaries so that it doesn't get corrupted by these public-private partnership relationships, then we can avoid the dark future that Dr. Hatfill is appropriately warning us of. The threat is there. There's no denying the threat. And I've spoken about it as the underlying justification for nucleic acid vaccination and going gene vaccine. This is why the government wants this tech. This is why the intelligence community wants this tech. And unfortunately, it was just handled irresponsibly, and we've all had to deal with the consequences, including myself personally damaged by the second of the doses that I received. That was one of the known bad batches. Over.
To tie in what you're both saying is talking about these chaos systems, and that we can think of something like Moore's law. As we get closer and closer to the number of transistors we can do on a whatever, no one backs down. They just like triple investment. Or you think about, I always think it's kind of funny that like a week after the U-2 was shot down, publicly Eisenhower was like, this is bad, we're not going to do this again. But privately, like, went to Skunk Works and was like, can you go higher and faster? And they're like, fuck yeah, we can. Like, so like we will, the A-bomb is like, that was crazy. Do you think you can make it like 1,000 times bigger? And I was like, yeah, I think we could. Like, so when it comes to just like killing each other, we have no problem doing it. But when it comes to overcoming these problems, we all have this sort of head hanging, like, well, I guess we can't do it anymore. But I think to what Dr. Hatfill is saying about these chaos systems, and then when the Soviets tampered with it, the shelves get empty. I think you could almost say it's prominent now, because today is, I believe, Missouri v. Biden, and it's kind of wrapping up all the censorship, the Trusted News Initiative, 2020 election fortification, vaccine damages. It might be that this system could have reacted to all of this, but like the Soviets tampering with it, we've tampered with the free flow of information.
Oh, can I jump in on that? Yeah. So, and my critics share all kinds of things with me, and one of them is that I dominate conversations and I interrupt too much. So I apologize.
Who cares? It's my show. It's a dictatorship. You can do whatever you want.
So this has been my objection about the whole underlying logic of globalism, which is the thesis that a globalized command economy will be more efficient. And the thesis that the reason why centralized planning and command economies and the underpinning structure that's usually called socialism has not worked in the past is because we just didn't have enough data. We didn't have enough resources. We didn't have enough fill in the blank, and we can get to the workers' paradise if we only have whatever this other thing is that we haven't had in the past. And so now we need to go all off and do that. But if you look at the course of history and these deployments, there's intrinsic fundamental structural problems with the idea of centralized planning, as opposed to enabling and allowing these kinds of evolved chaos-driven systems to self-assemble and operate autonomously or semi-autonomously within, you need to put boundaries to avoid rapacious behavior. But every time this is tried, we find that a single global solution will not work. It's incredibly inefficient, as opposed to decentralized semi-autonomous solutions. I don't recall, were we talking about fifth generation warfare at one point? One of the key lessons in warfare as we move from first to third generation which pioneered and largely perfected by the Germans in World War II, is the decentralization of authority. The pushing of authority down to local commander enables much, much more efficient battle responses because you can be flexible to local conditions. And this is the same logical problem that the belief system that, for instance, my wife and I were talking this morning. I'm going to introduce another thread: global warming or climate crisis, or now it's global burning. I don't know what they call it lately.
Boiling.
It used to be boiling, and it used to be global freezing. So in the logic of global warming, it's now advocated with Agenda 2030 that we need to take 20% of the farmland out of commission and allow it to recover. And so that's what leads to the logic of the Dutch farmers being kicked off their land is, well, everybody needs to reduce farming and return 20% of the land. No, that's so absurd. The underlying thesis, which by the way can be readily challenged, that we're having global desertification, that the data show otherwise. We're actually getting global greening, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. So that's turning out to be yet another lie. But even if let's assume that it was true, and we needed to return more land to its natural greened state, its forested state. Well, where is it that we really have the, quote, lungs of the planet where we would need to do that? Is it in Dutch recovered farmland because of dikes in the floodplains from Europe with all that rich alluvium? Or is it in the bloody rainforest? Okay, why are we kicking off Dutch farmers from productive farmland when if there is an issue, to the extent that it exists, it's occurring in the rainforest? It's the thesis that all things are alike. And that is the logic that underpins central planning. That is the logic of the USSR command economy. I love the story of plumbers. The plumbing industry in the former Soviet Union its output was measured by tonnage of pipe. And there was a revolution in the rest of the world when they went from iron pipe to PVC and plastic pipe, which is way, way lighter. But if you're a Russian pipe maker, okay, you don't want to go there because your output is measured by tonnage of pipe. Okay, you'd be shooting yourself.
Yeah.
You would be guaranteed to fail. And so therefore the Russian industry, the Russian economy totally missed out on the plumbing revolution because the central planners were sitting there, with their little checkbooks saying, well, how many tons of pipe have you shipped this year? And you'll get your gold, your red star, or you won't, you'll get a pay cut because you have or have not met your requirements in tonnage. That this is how this kind of bureaucratic, centrally planned logic goes. And I'm going to throw in another thread now since I'm on a rant. A lot of us are becoming more and more not libertarians, let alone, say, Republicans or conservatives. We're becoming constitutionalists. The idea that the right balance was struck so many years ago in the framing of these documents to guide a free people governing themselves, where you had to have a balance between some degree of centralization for things like enabling commerce and defense, and a large degree of decentralization. And how far out do you push that? Is it all the way out to a libertarian N of one? Or is it down to the level of states? And they struck a balance, and maybe it was the right balance or the wrong balance, but it's better than the idea of having the WEF telling us all how much farmland we should recirculate, and when we should have climate lockdowns, and when we should live in 15-minute cities. There, end of rant.
I loved it. Yeah, you're pointing out things as a rational human being. Like, this isn't efficient, and the rainforests are more important than Dutch farmland. And if we really cared about energy, we'd be going nuclear. Well, then you got to start shifting your mind and going, oh, I don't think they actually care about solving the equation. I think they want to sit on top of the garbage heap.
Hence the recent essays that we put out regarding the Kissinger report and the subsequent national policy statements out of the Ford administration that are still in place that have to do with capping global population at no more than 8 billion and reducing it as rapidly as possible down after that through a number of different means, which is apparently the State Department has put up, by the way, since then, a specific denial that depopulation is not the policy of the United States. But when you look at those declassified documents, I don't know how else to interpret those.
I think most people don't like Henry Kissinger because of his words and actions. I don't like him because he has never responded to my emails, and I've been trying to get him on here for 3 straight years. And I've even wished him happy birthday.
He's absolutely controlled opposition.
Yeah, no, he will not come on my show, which is very disappointing. I think it'd be great. Dr. Hatfill, we've kind of boxed you out, and because I have another show at 3 p.m., we got to wrap this up in a couple minutes. Do you have any closing thoughts? Because you are wearing the tie, which is the senior apparatus.
We Robert and I went over this the last time we met with you on the fact that he's correct. The answer lies with the local authorities, not the central government. But just a last little warning here. No other species of large mammal on this planet has ever achieved our global population densities at the moment. We've entered unknown territory. And essentially, we're all living in a very large biological experiment. None of us know what's going to happen in the future. It's time to quit messing around. And as a species, we need to get our act together. There's things we should have been doing already. And Robert, we talked about this the last time we spoke. Training the local authorities on medical surge, this type of thing. Going through our 20,000 pharmaceuticals, if not more, looking for off-label antiviral activity. Cheap, inexpensive viral detectors for screening. These are all things that actually should be in place right now. And I just see more of the same. The messenger RNA vaccines were a great idea. And I think it's going to show promise for fixing inborn errors of metabolism, birth defects. I think there's a huge thing about this. But we've got the people that were developing this not even bothering to look, is the spike protein itself toxic or not?
Yeah.
Somebody missed like the basics. Is this protein that we're going to teach the body to make poisonous or not? And hell yes, it was poisonous. There needs to be like checklists, and there needs to be responsible people in our federal health agencies, knowledgeable, well-trained, and whose primary concern is the welfare of the country.
Well
Not,
said. Well,
it's about
that's terrifying. Guys, for everybody listening, please go into the description. You can grab Dr. Malone's book, Lies My Government Told Me, or Dr. Hatfill's book, 3 Seconds Till Midnight. Dr. Hatfill, what's that blanket on that chair? I've been wanting to ask you. Is that a blanket or like a throw towel or something? It's like
it's a tapestry from Kenya. It's a cheetah.
That's so badass.
I spent a lot of time in Africa.
Sometimes I'm so proud of myself for these interviews because you two are both badass guests, and then I'll just throw it all out of the window with a complete lack of social awareness. Like, hey, what's the towel you got over the side of your chair? And I bring myself right back to. I don't know if it's self-sabotage.
No, that's you got 2 honey. Well, there's 3 honey badgers here.
Well,
you don't let something go easily.
I'm just that shows my level of intellect. Is I'm taken by the lion over Dr. Malone's shoulder and the cheetah over your shoulder. I'm very attentive. I don't know if that's good or bad. I don't have one though. So, but yeah, that's my final low IQ comment. Guys, please go into the description. Please go follow Dr. Malone. Please go grab the books of Dr. Malone and Dr. Hatfill. And yeah, guys, till next time. Thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to the next one.
Nice seeing you again, Tommy.
Thank you, sir. Guys, thank you so much. Thank you for watching.